Welcome to Darshan Talks, powered by the Kulkarni Law Firm. This podcast explores the challenges and opportunities facing FDA-regulated companies. Join us as we discuss the latest trends, news, and insights with experts and executives in the field.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm here with Tracy Weiner. Tracy and I connected over LinkedIn, and we've actually been discussing some of the stuff that we have in common, specifically guiding companies in the context of product launches, guiding companies in terms of thinking about what issues are popping up. And Tracy's got a tremendous amount of experience with product launches, with sort of being in-house. But I'm going to let Tracy introduce herself, and we'll go from there. So Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Weiner, and I have actually been in pharma and biotech for almost 12 years. My first life, I was a litigator here in Chicago, and then switched gears and started working in pharma, which I love. During the course of my career, I've been fortunate enough to launch, I think about 11 products. And so I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly, some really great launches, some really not so great launches, but it's been really exciting. And I feel like it's a great topic to bring to you guys today.
Well, that's a really interesting point you say there. Great launches and not so great launches. Did you mean as a launch itself, or do you mean from a legal/compliance perspective, that was, and excuse my language, a shit show? And here's
but well, it might be a shit show leading up to the actual launch. No one knows what goes behind the scenes and everything. Right. And I think I would say, when I say things that haven't been so great, it's really more of a disorganization. And I've been involved with launches that have had been really well organized. Nothing is ever going to go the way you think it is. You could, take tangents and, run down an issue that ultimately is not relevant at the end of the day. The products always get into the market on the day that they need to. The reps always have tools to use in the field in order to detail. So that's good. On the outside, no one knows that things might have been a little bit bumpy. But yeah, I mean, you never know. I think if I would give any advice to any team, I would say definitely set up a core team that's led by a project manager who can manage everyone's responsibilities. Everything people need to move the ball.
That's a really interesting point, because what you're saying is there are so many moving parts, and it's important to be organized. From your perspective, from the legal compliance perspective, how do you avoid the shit show we just discussed? How do we get organized in a way that leads to a smooth product launch?
Well, I think you really have to, take a step back and look at the product. How's it going to be administered? What the patient population is? What's the market? And really do a lot of analysis up front to determine how you want it to be, launched into the world. Not every product is the same as another one. So, for example, if there's a very, robust patient support program for one product, some of the other ones may not need those same, programs in place. It just depends on the product and the patient population. So I have worked on products where I felt like there's a little bit more of a cookie cutter viewpoint. And I think if you take a step back and you look at the market and you look at the patient population and what the patient's needs are and how the patient will actually be engaging with that product. Will they be at their doctor's office? Will they administer it at home? I mean, these are things you really have to look at, and they're very product dependent.
So what you talked about is this new rise, if you will, in patient centricity, and how that has in many ways changed how a product launch happens. Because I remember, and I feel like I'm dating myself at this point, but I remember when the patients were sort of the last in line to be considered. You were always talking about, what are the doctors going to need? Can we get the product into the pharmacist's hands? Blah, blah, blah. but it was never, well, what is the patient experience like? Right. And what you're talking about is that has changed. And I'm not 100% sure based on what you're saying if patients are top of line, but they're at least not being ignored. So when you know that, assuming it's not a cookie cutter launch for lack of a better term, and you know that patients are going to be actively considered, how do you start engaging? Who do you start pulling in to make sure that they're being engaged appropriately? And what I mean by that is, are you thinking about things like beneficiary inducements? So you're talking about like fair market value, or is that more for your HCPs? Like, talk to me about your thought process. What are the moving parts? What are the components you build together?
Well, I think, the marketing team specifically, I'm thinking of them, they do a lot of ad boards, talking to HCPs, what they see their current KOLs doing in with their current patient population, and how this product would be, best suited in, the doctor's opinion. Getting that feedback and getting feedback from patients who have the disease, what might be easy or relevant for them. Those are considerations to take in mind. I mean, I think you can't please everyone. There's no structure, I think, that can meet everyone's needs, but you start seeing trends. And I think that's the kind of research that you do on the front end that I think is very helpful for folks in the long run. You use that as a basis to build your program. For example, like if you don't hear from patients about certain things like, oh, they might need, a free product program, depending on the product. I'm assuming it's not like an IV or something, but that might be very helpful, and they tell you that, then obviously you want to start looking at how to structure a free product program.
And hopefully we'll get a chance to jump into the free product program. But what you discussed right now is a lot of this attention in the pre-launch is on sales and on marketing, because they are doing a lot of the engagement. Is medical affairs taking up a lot of your time at this point? Or are they more, since they have a little bit more leeway, they get a little less legal oversight because it's not as, they can make fewer mistakes. So from a risk-based perspective, that's how it plays out.
They do make mistakes. They do make mistakes. But, there is a little bit more latitude just based on scientific exchange, and they're, obviously engaging in those conversations pre-approval. So, and that's good feedback sometimes for folks to get too. Like, what are doctors asking in terms of what our clinical trial data showed? What does this mean in terms of the real world and how the product will be administered once approved? That's really good feedback also for the organization to have. How you share that information is a different story, but not everyone should necessarily have access to all information, but it is good context and does help with the structuring the launch and getting a good 360 overview of how this should all play out.
Now, one of the other things you mentioned there was this idea of talking to your KOLs, talking to patient advocacy groups and patient leaders, if you will, around what their needs would be, to start looking for those trends. It's one of those things that we've had a little bit of a deluge of data in the last, say, 6 months to a year. So I don't know if you had a chance to sort of look into this at all, but the FTC has come out, as you may have known, and they've talked a little bit about how to work with endorsers and endorsement programs. Is that an issue in how you're coming at it, or do you leave that for regulatory to think about?
No, those issues come up. I have worked on several products prior to approval, where we've done disease state awareness campaigns, and we brought in a celebrity. I can think of, at least 5 off the top of my head. First of all, I have to say, from a legal perspective, I have really enjoyed working on those, especially negotiating the celebrity contracts. Those create some really fun engagements. But Yeah, I mean, that's, there was one we did with, I think, Misty May Trainer when I worked at Teva, and it was called, I think it was Misty May Trainer, the volleyball player, and it was Ditch the Drip, is from what I recall. But it was, you know, an allergic rhinitis disease state type, you know, campaign. And I don't remember exactly when along the line of the product launch we did that, but it might have been after the fact. But it is really a good way to just get awareness as to the disease state, not necessarily the product. Obviously, the product's not really mentioned, but it does, you know, engage the folks in the on social media and, you know, commercials. I mean, obviously you've seen all the Kardashian commercials and stuff, but they've gotten into a little bit of trouble with what they've done. So I'm not sure I'd use them as a benchmark, but yeah, I mean, those are ways to engage the patient community and just get awareness out there. And I think it's been a pretty successful tool for most of the products I've worked on.
So I didn't even realize we'd go down this path, but now this is a really exciting conversation to have because we get to talk about celebrities.
Oh,
we get to talk about what that conversation looks like. So talk to me. How do you, so if someone comes to you, let's say it's a marketing, head of marketing, right? And they come to you and go, Bobby Flay, because I don't want to pick on someone you've worked with. So I assume a Bobby Flay is someone you haven't worked with. Right. What are your initial thoughts? So Tracy, I'm head of marketing. I want to work with Bobby Flay on a diabetes product. What are your initial thoughts as soon as you hear me say this? Do you go, crap, is it, I don't know if he's a diva. I don't know what I need to deal with. Like, what is your initial reaction? How do you start parsing it out?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, usually it's like through the marketing agency or corporate communications. They will contact the folk, you know, the people for Bobby Flay and start those conversations. And from that, they will outline what exactly Bobby would be doing for the company. You know, it'd be very clear, more than likely. I mean, although some celebrities do speak to the product once it's approved, of course, but you know, they'd outline like how many commercials, how many social media posts, how many, you know, live engagements. You know, we'd figure out the compensation. We'd talk about, you know, the likelihood that we might need to extend the contract, you know, make it clear.
Can I ask you a question there? You said are you involved in these discussions, or is it all happening at the agent level first before you get pulled in? You're just papering the conversation?
Well, 9 times out of 10, it's happening at that level. But there's always a ton of questions that I have because I build that into the contract. I want to make sure that it's very clear in the contract what exactly the celebrity would be doing for the organization. Obviously, there's some standard legal terms. It's very clear that, for example, in this particular case, perhaps that Bobby would not be speaking to product. And so that's clearly outlined that he won't talk about his, you know, the use of any of the company's products versus, you know, also the use of any other products, because we don't want him endorsing other products too. You know, obviously, you know, the FTC requires us to disclose that he's a paid spokesperson for the organization. We need to make sure that that's clear in all the posts and all the documents that, you know, whether there's a pamphlet or something that comes out or a website that has his image, that's, you know, very clear on the site. And then I start putting together the contract. And, you know, as I do that, I'm having a ton of conversations with our, you know, the internal team, just to ask questions about, you know, what have you thought about this? Do you think you'll need them for that? And, you know, you try to make the contract as comprehensive as possible. Obviously, you can't check every box, but you do what you can. And then it kind of it's helpful because it serves as a guide for the organization and the actual celebrity, so they know exactly what they will be doing for us. And that sometimes takes time. I would say it doesn't materialize as fast as the business would like. Contracts do take a little time, so you have to build that into the the timeline for the launch of the actual, engagement. So it's really exciting. All the celebrities that I've worked with have been really very excited to be a part of, the campaign, and I haven't encountered any divas, so that's good.
That's awesome. So let's explore that. So first of all, you start every conversation. Well, I guess you start every conversation with having the conversation and going, what is it that you want? I assume Bobby or whoever you'd be working with has their own team who are very, very smart, know what you're doing. So you're not going in there, unlike, say, you were talking to a YouTube celebrity, let's say, and someone who's not like a Mr. Beast, someone who's sort of an emerging YouTube celebrity. They may not be as well versed with the legal terms. But if you're talking about a Bobby Flay, they probably have their own legal team. You're not going to get one past them. So you don't really try too much to try those types of stunts. But I guess my question is, when you're dealing with someone like that, do you try to build a little bit of flexibility in your contract so that you kind of go, I don't really know what I'm walking into. We're launching a product. We don't know what we're going to actually hit once reality hits us. Or do you kind of go, look, they need to have clarity on the contract. They need to know exactly what they're responsible for, and we will hold them to all of those issues.
Yeah, no, I try to make it as, buttoned up as possible. Obviously, contracts can be flexible. They can always be amended. You can always put together, you can always terminate a contract and put another one in place. But, I do feel like the more information and guidelines that are in the agreement, the safer it is for the organization. And that's my role, right? When you're, whether you're a general counsel or whatever your position is in the organization, your job is to protect the company. And so you try to build in as, those parameters in order to do that. Now, nothing is ever perfect. And you have to, recognize that you'll never have anything that's completely buttoned up, but you do your best. But the reason why I engage so much with the business is that I've always felt that, as a lawyer for the organization, I can't truly be a support for the organization if I don't know what they're doing, if I don't know where they're going, where they want to, what their goals are. And I maybe a little too much insert myself into some of the meetings and the conversations because I need that context and background in order to help support them. Not because I necessarily am weighing in on their discussion, but I can't help them get where they want to go if I don't hear that myself. And so for the most part, I have to say that's well received. I think folks really like having their legal partner be a strategic partner as well. And so, it makes it easier also on them and me because I get to hear it firsthand, and then I don't have to have all these back and forth conversations with folks.
So I'm wondering, for me, I mean, I'm speaking from the outside here. It sounds like a really fun thing to do, right? It sounds, okay, we're going to work with celebrities and it's going to be fun because I see them on TV and all that good stuff. First question, do you get much of a say in which celebrity you're going to work with? Or do you kind of, you don't, someone else makes that pick?
Someone else, the agency is very helpful in finding celebrities who have the right disease state, for the marketing team. I think there are folks, though, within the organization. By the time it gets to me, it's already been, discussed at high levels. But like if there was a celebrity, for example, that had some, legal issues or maybe, had a well-known reputation for maybe being difficult or doing things controversial, influencers can be a little tricky sometimes. But, then people might not want the organization associated with a celebrity like that. So it is vetted at the highest levels generally within the organization before it ever gets to me as for contracting. So
the reason I'm asking this question is exactly what you just said. We picked on Bobby Flay, which was great because from what I gather, he's great. I have no idea if he is or isn't. But instead of Bobby Flay, if we would have picked Paula Deen, she has reputational issues right now.
Yeah.
Alternatively, I think the guy's name is Jonathan Majors right now. He's in the news right now for some kind of police altercation. Literally till the day before yesterday, super hot, emerging superstar.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, when you're planning these contracts out, and you're spending millions of dollars getting this all together, first of all, do you put a clause in there talking about things they can and cannot do and reputational risk? And how do you play that out in terms of reputational risk?
Well, first of all, you always have an out. You always have a termination clause in there that allows you to get out. Every contract for every contract should have that built in, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, there could be reasons completely unrelated to the celebrity why you need to pull the plug.
Yeah.
So you always want to build that in, but there are always clauses in contracts with celebrities that, or there should be, that say that they're not going to do anything that's going to essentially, create a reputational risk for the organization, and they're going to essentially stay out of trouble and not taint this relationship with any of their own personal issues. If something were to happen, you just probably have a conversation and terminate the agreement.
But that's the extent of it. You just terminate. You don't actually go for damages. Typically, it's not worth it.
No. I mean, I've never had that experience. I suppose you could. Most folks just want to cut ties and move on. And it costs a lot of money. And there's also a reputational risk for the organization. You don't want to be the company that goes after a celebrity for a reason. You have to make those. Sometimes the risks are less legal and more reputational for the organization. And that's how, decisions are made based on, we don't want to be the company that does X.
Yeah.
And those conversations take place. And I think, that's a very powerful reason to do something or not do something, especially when pharma and biotechs generally have a bad rap.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're talking on pharma and biotech, but one of the more interesting celebrities that have been in the news has been Kanye West, who reputationally, I think Adidas, I believe, is the one who had his contract, and they came out and they were very much they were all in, from what I could gather, with his celebrity aura, if you will, until he said, shall we say, some more controversial things, and they basically can get rid of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of inventory, is what I gather. So that seems like a really good reason to sue him, but I haven't heard anything about them going after him. Yeah. So what you're saying makes the most sense, which is it may be worth it, but it's not. It may be worth it legally, but it's not worth reputationally to go after him.
Yeah, no, I would imagine there were plenty of conversations at Adidas that they just wanted to cut ties and be done with it. And, whether they had, recourse to go after Kanye for any reason, I don't know. But I would imagine that was a conversation that took place a lot about how to maneuver that. And, those are, like I said, those are very important and sometimes the most critical issues, more so than the legal issues that might be at hand.
So let's flip that around. We've talked about a Kanye West. We've talked about a Paula Deen. We've talked about a Bobby Flay. What if this person is instead like a internet influencer, has 2 million people following them? I say that like it's casual. That's still rarefied air. 2 million people following your social media posts is a huge deal. But you're usually just literally an average person who walks down the street for most of your life. You just happen to take a lot of pictures. but this person may have the ear of your audience. How do you, in legal, I guess the marketing people come to you, say we want to work with them. You're not dealing with a quote unquote professional anymore. So how do you engage them purely from a legal perspective? Do you try to get them their own attorney? Do you tell them you need to get your own attorney? How did that play itself out?
So, before you get to the contracting phase, you want to make sure you have the conversations with them, that they know what the parameters of their role would be. And it's easier with celebrities because they've done this,
Yeah.
But they'll have some media training, and usually it's the agency or the corporate communications department.
I'm sorry, the celebrity will, or you mean these influencers will?
Anyone who speaks on behalf of the organization should have some media training so that they know where the guardrails are. And we have an obligation as part of the organization to educate them. If we were to ever be investigated, for a post, for example, that they made, the government would want to see, what did you do to prevent, them from going off the rails? Well, we had the post, reviewed through our promotional review committee. They were media trained. This is how they were educated. This is what they were told. This is what their contract said. Certain things that we'd want to show the government, to show that we took all of these responsible steps to make sure that they stayed, on the right path. Unless the influencer does a lot of work, I can't imagine that they necessarily have their own attorney, but I would definitely encourage that. It's so much easier to deal lawyer to lawyer.
Right.
Because then you find sometimes you're being asked questions where you're being put in a position where you might have to educate the other side on a term, and that's obviously not necessarily your role. But yeah, you get to that point where you have to show exactly what you did in order to keep them on the right path. And that's where your promotional review committee comes in. Whatever the post, probably the influencer would put up a social media post. So the post needs to go through the promotional review committee. And so legal, regulatory, and medical will always look at it and make sure the right language is in there. This is what you are being asked to post. And so that's, one of your checkpoints to make sure they stay on the right path.
I'm going to speak about one of the most infamous social media posts that Pharma has had, which is the Kim Kardashian one.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We're all very, very familiar with it. I personally was more familiar with it because as an attorney, you were kind of like, this is a huge celebrity. I'm not a Kardashian person, but the fact is that let's be honest, she has a huge social media following. So
absolutely,
her posting was a big deal. What was more impressive was that it was bad, that it was wrong. It was called out by the FDA. The rumor mill, and I have no idea if it's true, but the rumor mill was it was intentionally set up to do that. And the rumor mill was that they wanted a second round at it so that they can do a correction piece, but really land up advertising the whole piece again. I have no idea if that's true or not. So just to be clear, if anyone reaches out to me, I'm clarifying right now. I don't know if it's true. But is that she was, in my opinion, one of the first social media influencers in pharma. There may have been others, but no one close to what she brought to the table. In that case, was that experience the seed of a lot of growing up in pharma around influencer posts, or was she the biggest one to get caught and that's all it is? Or has that influenced how you negotiate influencer negotiations or any of that stuff?
I don't know that it's necessarily changed anything other than tightened the guardrails that the companies might have in place to ensure that they don't get their hands slapped. I think that I had not heard that perhaps that was an intentional post. There used to be back in the day, there was a thought that, if you're not getting a letter from FDA, you're not working hard.
Yeah.
I don't think that's my experience is that is not the strategy currently with most organizations, which I think is a good one. But that would be surprising. The post, I would assume, have gone through their promotional review committee, and folks would have signed off on it. So hopefully they had some checks and balances in place, but clearly it didn't help. I think if anything, it just brings to light a little bit of tools that folks can take and implement in order to, protect the organization a little bit more. It did get obviously a lot of publicity because it's Kim Kardashian. I have to say I have had plenty of conversations with business folks about using influencers to promote products, and I always try to persuade them not to, just because they don't have the sophistication that some of the celebrities do, just because the celebrities have had more experience with it. The other thing is you don't know all the other brands that influencer is working with. So for example, you could engage an influencer who is also working with an organization that you really don't want to be affiliated with. For example, the cigarettes or whatever, or
right.
Maybe a women's health product, or something, or a competitor. Obviously you do some due diligence and you do look into it to see if they're working with competitors, but unless you build into their agreement that they can't work with other organizations that maybe fall within the same market as you, that's typically a clause that you throw into the agreement, but that doesn't prevent them necessarily from working with companies that have nothing to do with pharma. That might not be something that you want to associate with.
Yeah. We can keep going on about this because this is so interesting to me, but we're well past time. Tracy, before we go, how can people reach you if they want some of the Weiner advice, if you will?
Weiner advice. Well, I can be found on LinkedIn. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I think my email is part of that profile. And then I would love to talk to folks about this. I have to say, celebrity agreements are probably one of the most fun things I've ever worked on in pharma. And I would certainly love to do it again. It's really fun. And it's great for the organization. There's always so much great publicity that comes out of those campaigns. So thank you so much for talking to me today. This was great.
I love it. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Darshan Talks. Remember, the information we discuss is for educational purposes only and is not legal advice. For additional valuable insights and updates, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at DarshanTalks.com.